You've likely seen the buzz around humanoid robots lately, headlines popping up everywhere asking things like, are humanoids the next big leap for humankind? Well, today we're doing a deep dive into what this really means. We want to cut through some of the hype, understand the actual developments, and look at the potential impacts based on some pretty interesting recent reports.
Indeed. And our main source for this exploration today is a really fascinating article from FinShots. It just came out May 16th, 2025. It takes a close look at this, well, global race to build humanoids. And it's not just focusing on the tech, which is impressive, but also the huge economic implications. And maybe most relevant for many listeners, what it could all mean for India's labor force specifically.
Exactly. And our mission here, it isn't just to read you a summary. We want to really unpack the key insights from it. We'll be digging into the big questions. Why all this excitement about humanoids now? What are the real driving forces? Who are the main players? And yeah, what are the potential ripple effects for the global economy? And maybe for you directly. We'll look at the promises, sure, but also the challenges and those really fundamental questions this whole shift brings up. Okay, so let's dive in. First things first. What exactly is a humanoid robot?
Okay, so at its core, a humanoid robot is basically a machine designed to look and move, well, recognizably like a human.
Hmm.
Typically two legs, two arms, a torso, usually a head with some kind of face for interaction.
Right.
And it's important, I think, to distinguish these from your sort of traditional industrial robots. Those are usually fixed machines, bolted down, doing one specific task over and over. Humanoids are meant to be more versatile.
Okay, so it's not just about making them look cool, like in a sci-fi movie. There's a reason for the human shape.
Absolutely. The core reason is actually pretty practical. Think about it. Our world, our factories, homes, offices, they're all built for humans, for our shape and size.
Hmm.
So by making robots that mimic that form, they can potentially operate in these environments without needing huge, expensive infrastructure changes. They can
Yeah.
sort of step into our spaces, use our tools, navigate our world. So it's less about pure mimicry and more about, practical integration. That's key.
That makes total sense. Okay, so the FinShots article, it breaks down building one of these into three key components. What are they?
That's right. Yeah, it simplifies it nicely. You essentially need three critical bits. First is the brain.
Mhm.
This covers all the intelligence, right? The AI models, the simulation software they use for training, the vision systems so they can see and understand the world.
Okay.
Think of the AI like super complex pattern recognition, letting the robot figure out what it's looking at and how to react.
And who's working on this brain power? Any big names mentioned?
Yeah, the article points to some you'd probably expect. Tech giants like Meta, NVIDIA, Alphabet. They're all heavily involved in developing these sophisticated AI and vision technologies. They're crucial for a humanoid to actually, understand and interact meaningfully.
Okay, got the brain. What about the actual physical robot, the body? What goes into that?
Right. The second piece is the body. This is all the physical hardware. We're talking sophisticated sensors to give it awareness, powerful lithium-ion batteries for energy,
Mm-hmm.
and really precise actuators. Think of actuators like artificial muscles, the things that actually make the limbs move and grip objects.
And the companies supplying these physical parts, are they different from the AI folks?
Generally, yes. The article mentions more established industrial players here, like Siemens, known for engineering and automation. Also, consumer electronics giants like Sony, they're big in sensors. And manufacturing powerhouses like Foxconn, they know how to build complex hardware at massive scale.
Got it. Brain, AI, and vision. Body sensors, batteries, actuators. What's the third piece needed to bring it all together?
The third and really crucial component is the integrator. These are the companies that actually take the brain components and the body components and put them all together into a working humanoid. They handle the really complex engineering, the system integration, making everything work smoothly.
Right. And who are some of these integrators? Who's actually building the complete robots?
It's a pretty diverse group mentioned, which kind of reflects the wide range of potential uses. You've got Tesla, obviously, with their Optimus project,
Yeah.
but also automotive companies like BYD, industrial automation specialists like ABB, and even construction and engineering firms like Unitech are mentioned. It suggests lots of different industries are seeing the potential here.
Interesting. So with these building blocks, brain-body integration seemingly advancing fast, why is everyone suddenly talking about 2025? Why the hype around mass production potentially starting now?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or maybe the $20,000 question, based on Tesla. The article points to some really concrete examples of progress that are fueling this Optimism. First, like you mentioned, Tesla's Optimus. It's now shown walking around unaided, even doing tasks like folding laundry, which is, surprisingly
Huh.
complex.
I saw that video. Pretty impressive.
And maybe even more significant is Elon Musk's target price, under $20,000. If they hit that, it's a massive game changer for accessibility.
Under 20 grand. Wow. Although you do wonder, is that realistic? What about maintenance, software, all that?
That's a very fair point. There are definitely questions around the total cost of ownership. But beyond Tesla, we're seeing actual deployment starting. BMW is reportedly already using some humanoids on their assembly lines. That suggests they're becoming practical for real industrial work.
Okay, so it's not just prototypes anymore.
Exactly. And even bigger news, Hyundai, another major car maker, has apparently placed an order for thousands of humanoids for their factories.
Thousands? Seriously?
That's the report. It indicates a pretty significant level of confidence in the technology, moving beyond just pilot projects.
Wow. Okay, things really do seem to be accelerating. But the article also spends quite a bit of time on China's role. What's their strategy here?
Ah, yes, China. They are making a very significant, very strategic push in this area. They clearly see humanoids as critical technology for maintaining their global manufacturing dominance.
Why now, though?
Well, they're facing a couple of pressures, right? A declining birth rate, an aging population, plus rising global trade tensions. So the Chinese government views humanoids as a way to offset potential labor shortages and keep their manufacturing edge sharp.
Makes sense.
They're pouring billions into R&D, offering huge subsidies to the industry. And they're framing it internally as basically the next industrial revolution. Their focus seems laser sharp on scaling up production and deploying these robots within their own factories fast.
Billions in subsidies. That's
Yeah.
serious commitment. So if this trend continues, what kind of market are we actually talking about size-wise?
The numbers being thrown around are pretty staggering. Goldman Sachs, for example, projects the market could hit around $38 billion by 2035.
Okay, 38 billion. That's big.
But wait, others like Morgan Stanley and Citigroup think it could be much bigger. They suggest if humanoid adoption follows anything like the path of electric vehicles, we could be looking at a market worth hundreds of billions of dollars.
Hundreds of billions. Okay, that definitely reframes the scale. It's potentially huge.
Yep.
But the article rightly asks, are they actually viable yet? What are the real forces making them seem more plausible now?
Yeah, viability is key. The article highlights several converging factors. First is what they call demand pull. Basically, there's a growing shortage of workers in many places, despite the global population being 8 billion.
How so?
Well, you have aging populations, like in Japan and South Korea, shrinking the workforce. In the US and Europe, fewer people want to do certain jobs. Low wage, high risk, physically demanding stuff. Even China is facing rising labor costs, eroding their old advantage.
Right.
And globally, the number of people over 60 is projected to double by 2050. So the need for automated help in some form is becoming much clearer.
Okay, so labor shortages are creating a vacuum that robots could fill. What's the second big factor?
The second one is huge, crashing costs. The article points out that just a few years back, a capable humanoid might cost over $100,000. Easy.
Yeah, niche research tools, basically.
Yeah, exactly. But today, some models are reportedly aiming for as low as $35,000. And there are projections, like we mentioned with Tesla, potentially pushing down towards maybe $13,000 in the coming years.
13,000. That's less than a car.
Right. This dramatic price drop makes them a much more realistic option for businesses and maybe even eventually for personal use. Who knows?
It completely changes the economics. Okay, what's the third reason for increased viability?
The third factor is favorable investment paybacks.
Hmm.
The economics are starting to make sense. The article uses food preparation as an example. Morgan Stanley apparently estimates that the time it takes for a humanoid to pay for itself in that kind of role is becoming competitive with human labor costs.
Especially with high turnover.
Exactly. Particularly in industries with high staff churn or jobs that are very repetitive or physically taxing. When the return on investment looks good on paper, businesses start paying serious attention.
Makes sense. If it saves money or solves a problem efficiently, adoption follows. And the final driver mentioned was government support, especially China again.
Yes, the level of state backing is pretty extraordinary, particularly in China. We mentioned the subsidies reported $20 billion specifically earmarked for the humanoid sector.
20 billion.
And get this, their government procurement budget for humanoids apparently jumped from just 4.7 million yuan in 2023 to 214 million yuan in 2024.
Wow, what is that, like a 45x increase?
Something like that. A 45-fold jump in 1 year. That signals an incredibly serious national commitment to leading this field.
You can't ignore that kind of push. Okay, so it's clear China's betting big. Which brings us to the question the article raises. If this opportunity is so massive, why isn't India, more heavily invested in actually manufacturing these humanoids right now?
That's a really important question for India. The article suggests it's not just about having the AI smarts. Building these complex machines at scale requires a very strong foundation in other areas, too. Things like advanced hardware manufacturing capabilities, super efficient logistics, huge amounts of capital investment, and crucially, uh, deep established supply chains for all the components.
Right, we talked about the body parts earlier.
Exactly. Building that whole ecosystem, the sensors, the actuators, the batteries, all sourced reliably and affordably, that takes significant time, investment, and expertise.
The article used the iPhone as an analogy, didn't it?
It did, yeah. Think about an iPhone designed in California, but assembled using parts from, over 40 different countries? Building advanced robots like humanoids will likely need similarly complex global supply chains. And the reality, the article stresses, is that China currently dominates large parts of that existing electronics and hardware ecosystem, from rare earth minerals right up to producing sophisticated components.
So even with strong AI talent, India might struggle with the sheer manufacturing and supply chain challenge for now. The article also mentions humanoids possibly becoming a commodity. What are the implications there for a country like India?
Well, if it gets to a point where the core technology is mature and success becomes more about efficient mass production and assembly, then the ability to manufacture the physical robot cheaply and reliably becomes the key differentiator.
Okay.
Setting up that kind of large-scale, efficient manufacturing in a new location like India would need, massive investment, very stable government policies, long-term planning, and also societal acceptance of robots becoming more common.
And this leads to the impact on India's biggest strength, arguably, its large, relatively low-cost workforce. How could humanoids affect that?
This is probably one of the biggest potential disruptions highlighted for India. India has a huge population, yes, but the article notes its labor force participation rate is actually quite low, which is a factor in unemployment.
Right.
Plus, a significant chunk of the economy relies on sectors that use a lot of low-cost labor, like textiles. And crucially, remittances from Indians working abroad are huge, around $130 billion last year alone.
130 billion. Okay, so how could humanoids specifically disrupt those areas?
Well, the article paints a potential scenario.
Yeah.
Imagine construction firms in the Gulf countries. Instead of employing thousands of Indian migrant workers, maybe they start using a smaller number of humanoid robots that can work 247 in extreme heat without breaks.
Oh, wow.
Now, extrapolate that possibility across other sectors globally where Indian labor is currently employed. Suddenly, India's traditional advantage of providing cost-effective manpower could start to erode quite significantly. That could mean job losses and a big hit to those vital overseas remittances.
That's Yeah, that's a pretty sobering scenario. It really underlines the potential downside. But it's not all doom and gloom, right? The article does point to some emerging opportunities for India in this whole humanoid revolution. What are they?
Definitely. Despite the manufacturing challenges, India is starting to make moves in humanoid development. The article mentions Reliance partnering with a company called Adverb to build industrial humanoids, specifically tailored for the Indian market. ISRO, the space agency, is developing Vyomitra, that's a half-humanoid designed to be an astronaut assistant.
Right, I remember hearing about that.
DRDO, the Defense Research Organization, is also working on robots, potentially humanoids, for defense use. And you've got startups popping up, like Vanar Robotics, prototyping service robots for things like deliveries or assistance in cities.
Okay, so there's activity, pockets of innovation. But the article also put India's current overall robotics position in context, didn't it?
Yes, it's important perspective. India currently imports most of the components needed for advanced robotics. And while India ranks 7th globally in industrial robot installations, the article clarifies that number is mostly fixed. Traditional factory robots, not the advanced mobile humanoids we're discussing.
Gotcha. So the strength isn't really in building the physical humanoids at scale yet, but where does the article see India's biggest potential playing out?
The big opportunity highlighted is India's massive strength in IT and software, a $250 billion industry. Instead of maybe focusing all efforts on building the hardware, India could become a leader in developing the brain side of things.
Ah, the software.
Exactly. Developing the robotic operating systems, creating the sophisticated AI training models, building the remote operation software, the cloud platforms that will manage fleets of these robots. This plays directly into India's existing skills in software development and digital tech.
That makes a lot of sense. Leverage the existing powerhouse. Any other opportunities suggested?
Yes. There's also the idea that as global companies inevitably look to diversify their manufacturing away from relying solely on China, the China Plus One strategy,
Mm-hmm.
India could position itself as a key assembly hub for humanoids, similar to how it's become a major site for assembling iPhones. Apparently, some global players are already looking at assembly in other parts of Asia to cut costs. India could potentially capture some of that.
So maybe not designing and building all the core components initially, but potentially excelling at the software brain and the final assembly. But the article seemed to end with a note of urgency.
Absolutely. The key message is that action needs to be swift. To really grab these opportunities in software and assembly, India needs proactive policies. Things like PLI-style subsidies, maybe, to encourage domestic efforts. Plus, fostering investment in deep tech R&D, and critically, working hard to build out those robust supply chains we talked about.
Okay. And the article's conclusion really emphasized the high stakes involved here.
Yes. The final takeaway is pretty stark. Whoever ends up controlling the key pulp to this emerging humanoid ecosystem, whether it's the core hardware manufacturing, the dominant software platforms, or the essential patents, they stand to gain enormous economic power and influence. The warning is clear. There's a real risk of falling behind and ending up playing catch-up, much like what happened in semiconductors or the early EV boom. Early movers often gain a lasting advantage.
Right. Okay, let's try and crystallize this. Based on our deep dive into this FinShots piece, what are the main takeaways for listeners?
Okay, summarizing. I'd say, first, human and robotics technology is advancing really fast now. It's not sci-fi anymore. Second, this push is driven by real economic forces like labor shortages and crashing costs, plus demographic shifts. Third, China is making an incredibly aggressive state-backed play to dominate this field. Fourth, this will likely disrupt global labor markets, potentially challenging India's reliance on low-cost labor and remittances. But fifth, there are significant opportunities for India, especially in leveraging its IT strength for the software brain and potentially becoming a major assembly hub. And the final, crucial point. Swift, strategic action is vital if India wants to capitalize on these opportunities and not get left behind in what could be a truly transformative technological wave.
Great summary. Okay, so moving just a little beyond the article now, here's a final thought, maybe a provocative one for you, the listener, to mull over. We've talked a lot about the tech and the economics, but given the sheer potential for these humanoids to become widespread and the really strong contrasting reactions, we see huge excitement versus deep worries about jobs and society. What do you think are the deeper, long-term societal and maybe even ethical implications if humanoids really do become commonplace in our lives? That wasn't the focus of the FinShots piece, but it feels like the crucial next layer to think about with this technology. What does that future look like?